I am in the heart of the Dolomites where the Olympics are happening right now. And cheering for Italy. We're doing great, but yeah.
You guys are doing great. I've been watching it. It's been wonderful. All right, so let's get right into it. Number one is climate romanticism dead. Love this topic. Yes. What is your perspective?
I mean, in January, as every year, the rich and powerful descend to Davos in their private jets and give a lot of speeches. And this year, it was very interesting because obviously it's a very tense geopolitical situation. And I personally found it super interesting to look at the speeches of kind of the main leaders, right? Whether it's Trump, the Carney speech that obviously went around the world, but also Merz, von der Leyen, Zelensky, Macron. And one thing that just stood out to me was that the word climate change wasn't used once in all of those 4 hours that I watched. It was only referenced once by the US president as the Green New Scam, but in no other context was it spoken about. Instead, what was center of everything was energy security. And it's just another reminder that climate change is just not a priority anymore. On the global stage. With one exception, which is China. Actually, their speech also was a lot about the opportunity in the green transformation. But in kind of Western democracies, it's not a topic. And what I took away from that was that more than ever, we spoke about this many times, but we need to appeal to other topics that are top of mind: affordability, right? Security, migration. We need to tie what we do to those topics, or we risk becoming obsolete. And nowhere was this more clear than at Davos.
Yes, and as a person who has been living in this space from the media side, whenever we finish a film on this topic, usually there's a lot of partners that want to come and partner with us to, bring the message out and things like that. And when Legion 44 came out and we finally have like a very viable tool to add to our toolkit, no one's interested. No one wants to partner. Nobody's, everyone says, oh, we just let go of our sustainability director, or this is no longer a priority. So from the messaging side, it is absolutely dead. And not only that, I think people, and I'm not counting myself in this, but the people that I've been talking to are relieved. They don't have to talk about it anymore. So it's a lot of like pivoting away. And like we've been talking about before, again, and I have been trying to do this anyway, long before carbon was really hyper focus. Before all this was more like restoration, concepts of resilience and adaptation and innovation, right? So all those things, when you put civilization inside nature's cycles in general, whether it's carbon, water, or whatever, you build a more resilient society. Is Kate Rayworth with her donut economics, I think, is a good model to look at how to build economies inside the civilization boundaries. And so just the word climate, I think, is probably not going to be coming back for quite some time, I think.
Yeah, I still have hope. Things can change both ways, right? Like they change very quickly one way, they can change the other way. But for now, yeah, we need to find a different way to talk about it.
Yeah, I would say at least the next 3 to 5 years, which I think is very key and important for this industry that we're talking about once a month, right? We're talking about carbon dioxide removal and this whole industry that has emerged to manage carbon, right?
Yes.
That is, and all these companies have, are in need of capital and structures and mechanisms to survive. And so they're going to be doing this in this environment that I don't think is going to change. I could be wrong, but doesn't seem like it in the short term. So number 2, out of the room, out of the way. So yeah, probably. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Trump, with an executive order, instructed the US to leave 66 international organizations, including the UNFCCC. So they'd already left the Paris Agreement, but now they want to specifically leave the UNFCCC. And it's been quite an interesting discussion to kind of follow what does this actually mean. And the negative side is obviously The US is the second biggest polluter in the world. You need them part of this arrangement. But the other one that I heard, which was interesting, was they've actually been roadblocking everything. So having them out could actually allow the remaining countries, which are all countries in the world minus the US, to do good work and to maybe face less friction. And so only time will tell. There are also some very specific ramifications. For example, corporate buyers in the US will not have access to UNFCCC removals. But that's something that I guess is not top of mind for most today. But yeah, big move with big ramifications, but maybe not as bad as people think.
Yeah, it depends on where you sit. So I find it interesting that the UN system was founded, ostensibly by the United States to help with other countries, but to help, engage in the world. In many ways, it's cheaper to do that than have these bilateral arrangements with everybody, right? So what I find interesting is that to pull out of not just the UNFCCC, but all of those, we're going to have
while still having the headquarters on your own territory, right? That's the irony for me, is that we're stuck with kind of UNGA in New York and all that crap like that. That will have to change.
Well, isn't there a place in Geneva anyway? Yeah, and that goes back to the shifting winds, I think, globally around regionalism rather than internationalism and localities, and and the larger, that's just a larger shift there. Yeah. And I wonder if other countries will follow. I wonder what's going to happen.
I don't think so, because everyone thought, when they pull out of Paris, loads of countries, nobody followed. Mm-hmm. So I think this fear of other countries following hasn't materialized once in the last 2 years. So I'm actually not too worried. I thought it would happen, but it didn't.
Yeah, it's interesting. We didn't really want to talk about global politics, but look, it's back in here.
Right? It's inevitable.
We're like, it's a sidebar. But actually, because when you're talking about energy and materials and resources. Yeah. All right. So number 3, stacking the deck for the energy transition.
It's a good actually transition to this topic from where we just were. Once a year, Nat Bullard publishes his 200 slide deck on decarbonization, the state of decarbonization. It's fantastic. It's worth every single minute you're going to invest into it. And this year's had a lot of different insights, obviously. But the main thing for me was that the energy transition is unstoppable. Like if you look at the data around renewable energy, around EVs, around what's actually happening in China, around what's actually happening in India, and I feel the economics are speaking a very clear language. And that gives me a lot of hope, because whenever I and everyone working in the sector or in climate more broadly gets the next punch in the gut, which happens on a weekly basis at the moment, you look at this data and you're like, these idiots can continue doing what they want. Economics are going to win. Like you can subsidize as much as you want. You can support coal. You can support oil and gas. They're not going to be competitive forever, given what's happening here. Right. And so, it's actually, I found it quite hope-inducing to look at these stats.
Well, it makes sense, because if you think about it, the current energy system that we're in was invented, 200 years ago? I mean, what human project lasted forever? Everything changes and evolves, right? And it made sense that, energy that comes from nature in general, sort of current sunlight, makes sense, right? And so, sorry. Yeah, it just makes more sense that a modern evolution of energy, and it may not just be renewables, right? I interviewed somebody around this battery that has to do with, the switching of photons and things like that. I mean, there's so many things that can power our civilization that will emerge soon. Not to mention fusion, but I don't, that's very...
But in the meantime, while we're kind of stuck discussing things in the West, China's just plowing ahead. And that's another thing. There's at least 10, 15 slides in there to just show you what China's doing. And they are seeing the gap that we're creating. Yeah. They're going for it, and they're going to dominate. They're already dominating most stuff, but they're going to dominate everything. And I'm wondering when we're going to talk about them in the context of carbon removal. It won't be long.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a shocking. Like if you just look at cars, right? Germany, my country, kind of main export cars forever, and China's taking over. So yeah, worth taking the big picture into account, being aware of it, and let's see when we'll start talking about China in this podcast.
I'm really looking forward to looking that slide deck over. I think you mentioned it before, and I should have done that sooner. All right, number 4, money north, removal south. Yes,
Yeah,
that
let's
is
go into
true.
carbon
Huh?
removal now.
Yeah.
After these kind of macro topics. So yeah, CDI4I did essentially an investment report looking at the last 5 years of CDI investment. The top line number is $3.6 million, $3.6 billion were invested in CDR. What stood out to me was kind of two specific insights. One, which was that 61% was invested in direct air capture, but direct air capture delivered 0.1% of CDR to date. And at the same time, 15% was invested in biomass-based carbon removal, which delivered 95%. Right. So that was for me a very stark contrast. And the other one was that the global south attracted only 2% of investment while delivering 70% of the removals. And so I don't know what, there are many other insights there, but while looking through it, for me, it was pretty obvious that we're probably going to see recalibration of where funding goes now that we have more data on what can actually deliver. Because yeah, so far it doesn't look like it's been going to necessarily the highest potential, at least in the short to medium term solutions.
So the removals in the south are through forests and carbon sinks mostly, right? Or is it
This is durable
biochar? And
removals, so it's
it
actually
is
this
durable.
is
It is.
almost
It's all
entirely biochar.
biochar. Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Well, again, plug for the Biochar Effect movie that's almost done. I'm so excited to share it. I've
We
mentioned this
all are.
before. Yeah, and it does talk a lot about, and I know you
Where's
talk
it going
about
to
it,
air?
Bernie, further
In
down. I think we're
Singapore?
going to, yeah, we're going to premiere in Singapore and probably somewhere in Europe.
Let me know where in Europe.
And
Looking forward to
yes,
it.
and then yes, of course, and Amazon, Apple again, Tree Plus, the whole same thing. So yeah, but yep, it's interesting. I love biochar. I'm sure I know you do too. it's so great. Number 5, the $4 billion deal breaker.
4 billion euros even.
Oh, sorry.
So
Let me repeat that. Number 5, the €4 billion deal breaker. What happened in Denmark?
So Denmark has featured previously because they are really one of the pioneering countries when it comes to carbon removal for many reasons. But they now launched the third round of their CCS subsidy, which is a big subsidy. 4 billion euros for a country the size of Denmark is a whole lot of money. And it's actually aimed to remove 2.5 megatons of CO2 from 2030 until 2045, which is a lot of their residual emissions. So this is a big deal. Also politically, this is a big deal. And what's interesting about it is they had pre-selected 10 companies. And then a week before the deadline of the tender, I saw that 9 out of 10 had pulled out. And that was like, okay, that's interesting. What's happened here? And eventually 2 submitted, I've seen now in the final information. But what's happened is essentially a good learning for anyone else who's trying to do this in government. They set terms that were just not viable for these companies. For example, they set really high fines if you weren't able to deliver on time. They kind of organized it all around their own 2030 targets, but these companies are not ready to deliver those volumes in 2030. So they were just, it didn't align with where the industry is at. There's a lot of other learnings, but bottom line is this was kind of a flop, and hopefully something that, yeah, other countries that are rolling out these subsidies can learn from if Denmark kind of publishes their own learnings as well.
So in the 4 billion, where did the 4 billion euros go? They didn't have to use them because no one took the deal, basically.
So there are 2 submissions. They're not going to be able to, they're falling short of their target with the 2 submissions. Mm-hmm. But for example, the biggest emitter of Denmark, which is a concrete producer, they submitted a bid. And that's pretty awesome. Still, like that is a success in itself because that's 1.5 megatons per year. It's the biggest emitter in the country. So if they got it, it would be a success, I think. But still, they didn't get what they originally planned, the government. And so I think,
Right.
it's worth looking at it.
Interesting. Number 6, the biomass efficiency question. What did the recent study tell us?
There's obviously a huge debate on how should we use biomass, assuming it's a finite resource. There's obviously countries where it's still pretty abundant and where that question might not come up. But there are many places where we have to decide already today, what are we doing with the biomass? And what are we optimizing for? And this study I thought was really interesting because they looked at a real use case of essentially a bioenergy plant, I think in the Netherlands. And the biomass was, I think, in Brazil mainly. And they analyzed 6 different things you could do with that biomass and what would yield the best climate impact. And for me, it was quite counterintuitive that essentially better than using it in Brazil, for example, if you actually pelletized it, shipped it all the way to the Netherlands, and then did bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, that was more than twice as good for the environment as the next best solution. So that's
Which was
interesting.
what?
Then I think the next best solution was using it for animal feed.
I see. Okay.
But I think that was the second solution. But locally in Brazil. But one big omission of the study that I highlighted and the authors acknowledged also in their comments was they didn't look at any other carbon removal options. So they looked at alternatives that weren't carbon removal. So they didn't look at biomass burial, they didn't look at biochar. And obviously that could change the picture. But still, it was an interesting takeaway. So. And I really hope that there's going to be a study that looks at all the biomass carbon removal approaches in comparison.
Yeah, because a lot of the people obviously would say just pyrolyze it in situ, just pyrolyze it and reapply where it was growing before, right? But yeah, it would be interesting to see how it stands up to the shipping across the world for bioenergy. Number 7, my household climate audit.
Yeah.
So you admitted, probably less than an American, but...
doesn't take much to beat the Americans on carbon footprint, but I actually emitted an average amount for European, which surprised me because I've actually already taken a lot of steps to reduce my carbon footprint. And it ended up being 70.4 tons for my family in 2025. In my case, car driving is the biggest one. So I calculated it. I kind of highlighted how easy it is these days. Honestly, with 20, 30 minutes with ChatGPT, you can get a really good sense of your carbon footprint. And it's also easier than ever to offset it. So I worked with Exomat in Bolivia. They actually helped me offset my carbon footprint. But it's just something that I really encourage people to do, is just to get an idea of their own footprint. You don't have to get it to zero, but you should know what you're individually contributing to the problem.
Yeah, you need to know where you fit into everything, which is really important. Like I live in the woods on like well water, and it's really interesting. And it's an old well, so it's not that deep. So we're very intimately tied to the water resources, the current water resources. This really causes you to, live within your boundaries. That's really interesting. Number 8, calm, conviction, and CDR.
Yeah, this month I highlighted Aurélie Gonzalez, who's the co-founder and CEO of Yama Carbon, a direct air capture company based in France. And Aurélie's just been doing a terrific job lately sharing insights from being a DAC founder and kind of showing what it's actually like to build a DAC company in these days, which is not easy. I thought it's fantastic because DAC right now needs a voice. It's not in great shape. And I feel that just being quiet is probably not going to help. And Aurélie is doing a great job at trying to keep promoting her industry, her technology, and specifically her company. Give her a follow if you're interested in direct air capture, I guess.
Interesting. In direct air capture, though, is it looking as an industry more into pairing removals with materials or fuels? Yeah. I mean, because I remember that was sort of off the table for a while, but where's that conversation? Do you know where that conversation has been going?
What we're seeing is that most DAC companies I know, they're finding a viable path in utilization, not removals. And there are some good use cases. I mean, one that I never thought about, for example, was fuel for military operations. It's actually really tough and a huge logistical challenge to get fuel where you need it. And with that, it might actually be significantly cheaper, at least from what I've read and seen, to produce it locally and have more independence in the way that you maneuver. So it's just one example that I've seen from one DAC company, but in general, I see much more focus on utilization just because there's a market. With SAF and everything as well, there's a market, whereas with removals today, there isn't. And so we're seeing a lot of companies shifting.
That's great, because that actually I think is extremely exciting and should be celebrated, because again, it's a better, like the earlier, I think it was number 3, where we were talking about the energy transition. I mean, it's a more evolved way to make materials ultimately. Maybe it's still very expensive, but eventually it'll compete, right? So
anything that keeps the industry alive, I think is a positive in these days.
Yeah. Number 9, Milky Wire for climate cash. Okay. How do you do that?
So the Milky Wire Climate Transformation Fund is, I guess, with Frontier, one of the main, those two are the main supporters of really early stage and experimental CDR. So they've already given 6 million to 27 suppliers, and those tend to be technologies that otherwise have no shot. And so it's really often the first kind of stamp of approval for carbon removal companies, and they have a yearly application round for funding, and it's now open. Actually, it's already closed by the time we record this. Hopefully many people applied. But yeah, they do great work, and I hope that they're going to continue to fill a key gap in the market.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what emerges from that. That's the exciting thing. Number 10, carbon removal goes with the flow. What flow are we dealing with here? Oh, rivers.
River alkalinity enhancement, which is something that I really love. There's, as far as I know, only one commercial company right now, Carbon Run. Maybe there's more that have appeared, but they sold their first units, their first 76 tons. Not sold. They actually delivered their first 76 tons. And that's a very small amount, but it's still super exciting because this is an approach that I think has a lot of potential, that actually sidesteps a lot of the challenges of ocean alkalinity enhancement, and that I find is much easier to sell to politicians because it doesn't touch the sea, it doesn't touch the oceans. It has been done for decades already in Norway, but for salmon farming and salmon in rivers. So we've been doing it. We just haven't called it carbon removal. And so there's some history about it. And yeah, super excited. Hopefully it's the first of many.
Nice. What is the material? Did they mention what it is they use?
Usually it's some sort of lime, like they would do for OAE, but just put in rivers. But it ends up in the ocean. So in that sense, it's very similar to OAE.
Nice. And sadly on 11, back to policy, the endangerment clause, getting rid of that in America, that was big. Reactions.
That is big. I mean, we knew it was going to happen, right? Like Trump had told the EPA very clearly that this had to happen. So we were just waiting for it. I've got very mixed feedback from US colleagues on kind of the impact of that. There are people who say kind of the EPA was never meant to regulate that kind of stuff. Because the EPA is much more about the immediate impact of gases on kind of a community, right? And also that other things are still standing and won't be touched, like 45Q. But I mean, in the face of it, I think it's the biggest reversal that we've seen in this administration when it comes to climate.
Yeah, I would say.
But yeah, I'm curious for your take. I mean, you're in the US, so
it's the biggest one. Because it basically guts the rationale for any overt action. So it really falls back to efficiencies and innovation that absolutely don't consider any of the climate conversation of the last 30 years, right? So that entire argument is no longer salient when it comes to needs for policy or corporate action, right? So everyone can decide for themselves what they want to do, right? And so because there's no basis. Yeah, that's where we are. So I think, again, I think it's not funny, but I think it's in difficult times, people make better solutions, right? That's the hope, right? So all of these things will continue forward because they're just better. And that's what you were saying earlier, that a lot of these technologies and a lot of these energy systems are just going to be better over the long haul. So,
Yeah. We don't know
you
the
know,
also the unintended consequences of what's going to happen here in the good and in the bad, right? There's so much at stake right
mm-hmm.
now in the US. If you look at what is happening to energy prices, right, with data centers and so on, there's so much that's happening right now that I find it almost impossible to predict where the US is going to stand in 2 years when it comes to energy, but also carbon management. So I think it's just we're noting what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
and then just put your head
Yeah.
down and keep working.
Yeah, and back to China. I mean, if it's about, and everyone's favorite man, Elon Musk, did pointed to China and said, "Look, China is doubling down on all energy. They're not making a big deal. They're looking at all of it. So they're gonna, at the moment, maybe win this energy game in the sense of
Ironically, they're
having the
taking
most of all
ideology
of it."
out of ironically they're taking ideology out of the equation while we're putting it in.
Right. And they're just,
Yeah.
and they're going to have the most energy to deploy. I don't know if you saw this last point before we sign off, is this the robot army doing martial arts. There
Yeah, I did.
did you see that?
Yeah.
I found that to be a little disconcerting. Um, I don't know. What do you think? And they have the energy to do that kind of stuff. That's crazy.
It's a
Just,
demo. I
I
like whenever I
know.
see
I
these
don't know.
things, there's so many videos of like humanoid robots just not like running against the door 100 times. Like I'm not too worried for now about these things.
Really? I don't know. It's the first time I'm with you until I saw that video. And then all of a sudden I realized I'm like, okay, there's robots that can do a lot of things all together. And if you have the energy, yeah, anyway, so I'll leave it with that. Yay for February. I can't wait to see what happens in March.
Thanks,
So,
Layla.
yeah, have a good Olympics.